And here we're at the German cemetery of Langemark, the so-called Studentenfriedhof. It's completely different than the Commonwealth cemeteries, as you will see, but definitely also worth a visit. The Langemark Cemetery here is one of only four First World War German cemeteries in the Flanders region. Now, if you compare that, of course, with the 247 British Commonwealth cemeteries, that is a huge difference. More than 44,000 are now buried here on the Langemark Cemetery, and it's for those that the pollard willows serve as a guard of honor. And that's right here on the street side towards the cemetery entrance. This side of the cemetery is also surrounded by this white ditch, kind of a moat, symbolizing the flooding of the Ezer front. The Langemark German Cemetery began during the war already in 1915 and had about 10,000 burials by the mid 1920s, when it was officially inaugurated by the so called VDK, the Volksbund Deutsche Kriegsgräberfürsorge. Not an easy word to pronounce. The German version of the War Graves Commission. But most of those buried here were brought here after the Second World War. In the 1950s, it was decided to establish three German collecting cemeteries for First World War dead in Flanders. Right here in Langemark, of course, but also in Menen and Wlotsloo. With more graves gathered together in fewer locations, it was considered that the care and the upkeep of the cemeteries could be carried out more effectively. 9,500 were exhumed and brought from other burial places in the area. It was then decided that all of the thousands of unidentified German dead being discovered in the fields and some isolated burial sites during the clearance of the battlefields would then be taken to Langemark for interment. There was unfortunately not enough room to create separate graves, so a mass grave was created for a large number of casualties. The gravesite would then be called the Kameradengrab or the Comrades Grave. In the distance there, you can see the church of Langemark, which was reconstructed in the 1920s, of course, since it was destroyed during the war, as was the entire village of Langemark. And here on our right hand side, we have the only entrance to the cemetery. It resembles a bit like a bunker, but made out of a typical German sandstone from the Weser River area. It is meant to represent the transition to or from everyday life to this place of mourning and remembrance of those who died. And in that way, create some distance between the world of the living and the world of the dead. Now, in the side room here to the right, there's the room of honor with oak panels with the known names of 6,313 soldiers killed in battle who were buried in the original cemetery. Many of these were killed in battle in October and November 1914 during repeated attacks in the First Battle of Ypres. They included more than 3,000 student volunteers, hence, of course, the name Studentenfriedhof, which means student cemetery in German. So it's not true that all those buried here in the original cemetery were students or kids, but a significant number nevertheless. Now, on the other end of the entrance building, we're entering the actual cemetery here. And I'm sure you notice immediately the completely different style compared to the British Commonwealth cemeteries. It's a lot more sober, somber. No individual graves with flowers or plants, but one stone tablet for several soldiers, up until 40 even. There are also several groups of three basalt lava crosses, an architectural feature that is found on many German military cemeteries. It refers to the logo of the German War Graves Commission, the VDK. On these bronze panels here are the names of more than 17,000 soldiers who were buried in the Kameradengrab or the Comrades Grave. Based on archive research by the VDK, these non-identified soldiers were almost certainly exhumed and reinterred here in this mass grave. There are 68 panels on either side of these concrete blocks around the mass grave. The names are in alphabetical order and they include the full name, rank, and date of death. Now, between the blocks with the panels, the actual Comrades Grave here. In the center, there is a bronze wreath of oak leaves with the words Ich habe dich bei deinen Namen gerufen, du bist mein. I have called you by your name, you are mine. That's a quote from the Bible and the coat of arms of the Belgian provinces. Without a doubt, the most moving feature of this cemetery is the bronze statue of four figures solemnly watching over the many thousands of German casualties of war. It was made by a Munich sculptor and professor Emil Krieger. His inspiration was a photo of mourning soldiers in 1918 as they stood at the grave of a fallen comrade. The statues are meant to be looked at from a distance and to convey both the feeling of mourning as well as to invoke reflection. Unidentified casualties are not all buried in the comrade's grave, but also in the regular graves. Just like on British cemeteries, many of these graves contain unknown German soldiers. The difference, of course, is that here they only have one gravestone for 8 fallen. The cemetery has a special atmosphere. It's peaceful, it's solemn, but also somber. And I think definitely the oak trees contribute to that, especially on windy days like today. The oak, of course, is also the national tree of Germany. Now, what has also become part of the German national identity in the 20th century is the so called Langemark myth. The Langemark myth dates back to the First Battle of Ypres in 1914, when many inexperienced German infantry troops suffered great losses when they attacked the Allied positions near Langemark, and those were experienced French infantry and British riflemen. The story about the battle started leading its own life afterwards, after the war, resulting in the Langemark myth, which is an exaggerated and idealized version of the battle, in which it was claimed that these brave German students and schoolboys sang the first stanza of what later became their national anthem as they charged to their deaths, basically. Deutschland über alles. These young people became heroes who had sacrificed their lives for the nation, and you can imagine it was several times exploited by nationalist actors, including, of course, the Nazis and Adolf Hitler. He even visited this cemetery on a 2-day tour of the World War I battlefields after the Battle of France in May 1940, when the whole of Belgium was occupied by the German army. Now, on this higher part of the cemetery, you can see these large concrete blocks with in front a granite block with the names of the army divisions and student organizations that had helped in building the original cemetery in the 1930s. They were put here to invoke the defense line, together with these 3 restored German concrete shelters that are partly above ground with entrances directed towards the German lines, which were north. These bunkers were once part of the Wilhelmstellung, one of the defensive lines that the Germans developed in early 1917, so just before the Third Battle of Ypres. About 1.5 kilometers behind the front line, they constructed the second line, the so-called Albrechtstellung, and another 1.5 kilometers behind that, the Wilhelmstellung. So this was about 3 kilometers behind the front line until July 1917. The fighting came closer in the months after that, with the British taking this position in October 1917, only to lose it again a few months later in the German Spring Offensive. These bunkers were part of a heavy machine gun position and were likely also used as shelters for the reserves of the battalions on the front line. They wouldn't have looked so perfect at the end of the war, of course. There was quite some fighting in the area. They were restored in the 1930s. It took a while after the Second World War, but more and more Germans come to visit the cemetery. But even before that, many visitors from British Commonwealth countries came to pay their respects, and they still do. They understood that all these boys, all these men, were also victims of this bloody and destructive war. Now, if you want a truly comprehensive Great War visit to the Flanders Fields area, I believe that you should also plan a visit to one of the German cemeteries. You can come to this one in Langemark here, or you can also visit the very impressive German cemetery of Wlotszlo. Thank you for watching, and please subscribe if you want to be notified of new videos on World War One, World War Two, or other aspects of the history of Belgium. Thank you.